New this morning, President Trump is celebrating a federal appeals court decision that temporarily put a pause on a lower court's order requiring that he give back control of California's National Guards to the state. The president writing on social media in part, quote, "Thank you for the decision." Another hearing is set for Tuesday, and this all stems over, well, what you see on your screen right there, from Trump's decision to federalize National Guard troops and send them in to respond to the LA protests over his immigration raids. CNN's Harry Enten running the numbers on this one for you this morning. So overall, how have what we've seen in the last days, but also the last few weeks of ramped up immigration crackdowns, these raids that we've seen in California and beyond, and the protests in response, how's it impacting his approval?
Yeah, I think the simple word here is hurt. It has hurt Donald Trump's popularity. You can see it right here. We have two new polls, Quinnipiac University, AP Newark. I got the prior poll for you on the screen. I got the now. This is the net approval rating. You could see this in Quinnipiac, -12 to -16. How about AP Newark? -16 to -21. Awful, awful, awful for both of these pollsters. Where we are right now, both Quinnipiac and AP Newark, the worst for Donald Trump in this term so far. He is very much way underwater, at least in these two polls.
And this is overall approval. How about specifically on immigration?
Yeah, so immigration has been a strength for Donald Trump. That was why in the beginning of the week I said that Donald Trump wanted this fight. Maybe he shouldn't have wanted this fight. What are we talking about here? Let's take a look at the net approval rating for Donald Trump on immigration. You go back to June 1, he was at +4 points. Look at where he is now, -2 points in the aggregate. That is a drop of 6 points in only about 2 weeks' time. The only thing that's happened over the last 2 weeks is obviously Donald Trump's ramped up immigration hawkish agenda. And at least at this particular point, the American people are saying, no, we do not like that. And they have turned against the president on his core strength issue of immigration. He is now underwater on the issue that has been strongest for him.
A bit of a turn, but it is happening this weekend. This weekend is the big military parade that the president, we know, has been pushing for and is getting this time to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. There's been a lot of back and forth about concerns over cost and simply how much the hardware and military tanks are going to weigh, and could they damage even the roads. But still, it's moving ahead. But how are people feeling about it?
Yeah, you know, if immigration has not helped Donald Trump, maybe he wants to change the subject to this military parade. But take a look here. Government funds for the military parade, a good use of funds? Only 38% say yes, it is a good use of funds. How about not a good use? 60% say not a good use of funds. And get this, in the center of the electorate among independents, just 24% of independents say it is a good use of funds. This has simply been one of the worst polling weeks for Donald Trump that we've seen. You really only saw worse numbers around his 100th day. But at this particular point, Donald Trump is much more towards the trough of his popularity than the crest of it.
Let's see what next week brings.
Let's find out.
It's great to see you, Harry.
Nice
Thank
to see
you
you
very much.
Major legal developments after a federal judge ruled that the Trump administration had illegally taken control of the National Guard and deployed them to California's immigration protests. Judge Charles Breyer wrote that President Trump's actions were illegal, both exceeding the scope of his statutory authority and violating the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution. He wrote he therefore must return control of the California National Guard to the governor of the state of California forthwith. Now, then, a federal appeals court paused that ruling until Tuesday, when a hearing is scheduled. President Trump reacted to that early this morning, thanking the appeals court for putting this off until Tuesday. With us now is Ellie Honig, CNN senior legal analyst, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. And Judge Charles Breyer, yes, brother to Stephen Breyer, he wrote a pretty scathing ruling against the Trump administration. What were the highlights to you?
He did, John. No words were minced in this opinion. So the most important decision that Judge Breyer made here is that he, as a federal judge, does have the power to review the president's federalization of the National Guard. The administration had argued this is a decision solely for the president. You, the courts, have no role in this. Judge Breyer forcefully disagreed. And then he proceeded to reject essentially every argument the administration has made. He said this is not a rebellion. He said it's not even close. He said the argument that this is necessary to enforce federal laws, also not even close. The judge made a point of saying he made a finding that the presence of the National Guard is actually making the situation on the ground worse and inflaming things. You mentioned the 10th Amendment, John. Under that, the judge found that this is a state's power, not a federal power. And so this is a forceful rebuke by the judge of the president's actions.
An expansive rebuke, but then almost immediately paused until at least Tuesday. What does that mean, Ellie?
Yeah, so then the tables turned very quickly about an hour later last night, right before midnight. So the Court of Appeals, this is the mid-level between the District Court and the Supreme Court, they're next up. They immediately put a pause on the judge's ruling, meaning the National Guard can remain deployed at least until Tuesday. On Tuesday, the Court of Appeals will hear an argument. I do have to make a slight comment to Donald Trump's comment. The Court of Appeals did not rule that Donald Trump wins. What they did was they paused a very bad ruling for him. So it was good news for Donald Trump that the Court of Appeals made that ruling, but the Court of Appeals has not yet signed off either way on this issue. They've just put it on pause.
And then very quickly, in 30 seconds or less here, Judge Breyer in his ruling also said something interesting about the Marines. His ruling and everything he wrote was about the Guard, not the 700 Marines who've been sent, I guess, in just the direction of Los Angeles, and that's relatively pertinent here.
Yeah, the judge found that for all the smoke about will there be Marines deployed, he's not seen any actual evidence that they have been. He did stress the old notion that there's a strict line of separation between the military and law enforcement, and he sort of warned that either way, National Guard or Marines, they are not to engage in actual law enforcement activity, no arrests, no search and seizures. At most, they can go out there and support and protect federal assets.
Yeah, as far as the Marines go, no mention yet. Just come back to me if and when they do more than they're doing now, he seemed to be saying. Ellie Honig, again, a major ruling on a night of major news. Thank you very much for all that.
Now, we've seen two rulings in the past 10 hours in the standoff between President Trump and California Governor Gavin Newsom. The question is on how much say states have over the federal government's ability to mobilize National Guard troops in emergencies. That is what is at the heart of this new ruling that paused the order requiring the president to hand back control of California's National Guard. So what could it mean for protests in other states? President Trump reacting to the appeals ruling on Truth Social moments ago, saying in part, the appeals court ruled last night that I can use the National Guard to keep our cities, in this case, Los Angeles, safe. That CNN legal analyst Elliot Williams joins me now. Hey there, Elliot. Thanks for being here. So first, what the president just said, is that true? I think this can all be confusing for people when there's an order, a reversing an order, a pausing of that order.
Right.
What do we know right now?
Right now, everything remains as is. The National Guard can stay there at least through the next hearing on the case, which is Tuesday. So right now, there's been a temporary pause.
So
on
the
that
judge
judge's
is like,
order.
I need more information.
Yes.
But he has not said, you're right, you're wrong.
Right. And the appeals court says, hold on, let the National Guard proceed. For now, we've got more legal back and forth to take care of.
But I'm always looking for sort of kernels of information about how the judicial branch is thinking. And this judge raised some questions about the administration's arguments that it had the right to do this because it believes that what's happening on the streets, the fireworks, the rock throwing, that it's a rebellion. And the judge didn't agree. He said, look, the evidence that of any violent protesters were attempting to overthrow the government as a whole is not there. But he also said violence is necessary for rebellion, but it's not sufficient. What does he mean by that?
So, interesting window into how judges work. The first thing judges do when analyzing a statute is actually start with the dictionary, and he goes through Merriam-Webster and Black's Law Dictionary.
So if the government says this is a rebellion, he goes and figures it out.
And the law itself, the statute uses the term rebellion. So what do we mean with a rebellion? And where he lands is that ultimately there is a taking up of arms in an organized manner against the government. Now, what the point the judge makes is that certainly people here took up arms. Throwing a brick, let's be clear, at a police car is taking up arms in some way, but was there the level of organization, and was it targeted as perhaps overthrowing the lawful authority of the United States? That's not the case here. That's people who are breaking the law and ought to be prosecuted for it, and even stepping outside their free speech rights. But that's not, per the definitions, a rebellion. That's where the judge went.